Hello everybody, welcome to the channel. In this particular video we're going to be talking about some of the different materials that I'm going to be using during my hull extension project. So I want to talk about the fiberglass cloth, the boards that I'm going to be using, and I'll quickly touch on the resin as well. But the next video as well is going to be about me setting up the Thermolite, preparing the Thermolite for one of the bulkheads, doing the laminate over the top. There's going to be two layers over the Thermolite on all of the Thermolite. Well, no, actually, on the transom it's going to be a little bit different because that's where the motors are going. That's going to be really beefed up. But essentially, the stringers and the bulkheads, what I'm going to be doing on each of these pieces of Thermolite is I'm going to be sealing them off and setting them up with one layer of 600 gram chop strand mat and one layer of 600 gram quadaxial cloth. Okay, so let's have a look at it. Let's have a look at the different cloths. So essentially, the very first layer, whenever we're doing fiberglass work, the very first layer is going to be the resin. What we want to do is wet out that surface, get it that resin soaking into the substrate, get it in that. If it's timber, it'll start to soak in a little bit, and some of these boards, it'll basically bond itself, start bonding itself to the board. And then what we're going to be doing is we're going to start laying glass. That's a tiny little piece of 600 gram chop strand mat. There's a better piece. Yay, big chunky bit. Alright, and exactly as the name suggests, it's chop strand mat. So there's thousands and thousands and thousands of strands in there. My wife's going to do with my back deck. She's going to get cranky at me. But anyway, it is what it is, right? So that's thousands and thousands of pieces of chopped fiberglass bonded together, emulsion bound or powder bound. This is powder bound, by the way. The reason that I'm using powder bound is because I'm using vinyl ester resin. You can use emulsion bound in certain vinyl ester resins. I'm using it because my supplier has recommended that I use the powder bound for this particular brand, and that's the way I'm going. So powder bound 600 gram chop strand mat, lots and lots of strands there, chopped strand. So it's glass, it's just all chopped up and glued together in a big mat. So essentially the idea of that is the chop strand mat will go down first, and then we put whatever our laminating schedule is, the next layer on top of that. So that forms our bond that allows all of the resin and everything to saturate that glass, and it allows the next layer to bond really well to that. And then, you know, the next really easy one to look at is our woven rovings. Really simple. So what you see is two directions. You see a layer of glass going vertically in this image anyway. It could be a flat, so that's horizontal. So one layer of glass going this way and another layer of glass going this way. But what do you notice? Again, lots and lots of strands of the glass. Okay, so what does that tell us? The thing about fiberglassing and its strength, its structural integrity, and where it gets its strength from is the direction of the glass. Very important. So in this particular form, what we've got is the strength coming in two directions. This direction, you can see the glass, so in the 0 degree axis, and then the 90 degree axis, perpendicular to it. So you've got all of that strength and quite a heavy mat. So when we lay that down and we start to put the resin in over the top of the styrenes and everything, will start to break that down, and it'll look a lot different than that's for sure. And that's essentially, yeah, where it gets its strength from. And that's the very important thing whenever you're considering if you're doing a DIY project. Have a think about the direction of the cloth and what's going to be suitable for you. Now, the great thing about these sort of cloths these days is you can get them in pre-stitched. So what we've got here is essentially our turn that around, sorry, so you can see it. It looks very similar to, if you look really closely at it, you've got the woven roving there, and then you've got our biaxial cloth with chop strand mat on the back of it. Okay, And again, we're getting our strength from those two axes. So our 0 degrees and our 90 degrees. Now, when you look really closely at it, it looks like it's sort of going all over the place. But what you can see there is actually the stitching. As opposed to this, where you've got a mat that's woven, just like, I don't know, weaving a basket or something like that. It's woven, that's what holds it all together. Because if I can basically grab one of these, let's say call it a strand, so we pull that out, we go, and we can pull that out of there. So now we've got a big gap. That's it there. So that's just woven in there. Nothing else holding it together other than the weaving itself. Let me put that over there for a second. But whereas this one is stitched. So they get a very fine line of stitching there, which just in and out, and it looks like it's 45 degrees, but the strength in this glass, because the glass is running again biaxial, 0 degrees and 90 degrees, then that's the direction of our strength on that axis, on the 0 and 90 degrees axis. So if we want to lay up, let's say we want to get strength in every direction. So we might lay this down, a biaxial, and then we'll lay a double bias over the top of that. So the double bias is similar to this. So this here is the double bias without the chop strand mat on it. It's pretty easy to get it all out of shape, out of whack. And then once, if you're trying to get this onto a deck of a boat or something, and you lay it down and it's not quite right, and you've already got some resin on there and you try and move it, it'll all get out of shape and it'll all clump up and it'll get really, really messy. Very difficult to work with in some circumstances. So you've got to be really prepared. You've got to have it all cut, ready to go, lay it down and leave it where it falls. Because the minute you move it, it'll just clump up and it'll get really messy. That's if you use it in this current form anyway. So again, the strength of this is in the 45 degree axis. So come backwards and forwards like that. Yeah? And then if we put this down, so this is 90 degrees, so we get our strength on our 90 degrees axis, 0, 90 degrees, and then we do our double bias and we go 45, 45. So we've got all of those different angles that makes it really, really strong. Our strength in all these different directions. But you know, the really good thing about it is you can actually get quadaxial glass. So what that means is the same sort of thing. You've basically got your chop strand mat on the back, and then you've got your biaxial and your double bias built into the same mat. So it's all there ready to go. So this here, if I just have a look around for a second, so yeah, this one here, so this is probably a little bit easier to see. I'll hold it right up nice and close. So that's our double bias yet again, our plus and minus 45 degrees, bush, right? And then if I've got some quadaxial over here that I'll grab, and it looks exactly the same as our other. So what that is you've got all of the axes. So 0 degrees, 90 degrees, plus minus 45, plus 45, whichever way it is, and then everything's taken into consideration. All of the different directions that we need, all of the different strength is in there. Now my laminating schedule for my boat, I've had it all done up professionally by naval architects, and it's reasonably straightforward. So what we've got is we're using 600 gram. So we're using 600 gram double bias, then we've got 600 gram biaxial, 600 gram double bias, 600 gram biaxial. So what that means is we're doing one layer over the top of the other, and that gives us strength in all those different directions that we were talking about. 0 degrees, 90 degrees, minus 45, plus 45. So we've got all of those different directions that we've taken into consideration. Now, got a little picture here, I'll put it up on the screen, but that's basically it in a nutshell. All the different directions of the cloth to provide the structural integrity or the strength that we need on our laminates. Okay, so that's pretty much our glass in a nutshell. Now, when we look at the materials again. So H60 foam with glass on each side of it, all prepared, all ready to go, really easy to cut. This stuff is amazing to cut. It's super fast, really quick, really easy. Circular saw, reciprocating saw, jigsaw, whatever you want to use to cut this stuff, really quick and easy. The thing is this, just keep in mind that if you ever use this, then they put this sheet on the outside on one side of it, and that just comes off. If you leave that on there, then you're going to have delamination problems. It's basically going to start peeling. Fiberglass is going to start peeling off. So whatever you do, just make sure that you take that off. Now I've used this a few times in boats now, and it is super strong stuff. To test it, well, not so much to test it out, but just playing around, I sort of grabbed a sledgehammer one day and I started bashing the stringers, because I installed stringers into my boat with this stuff, and I grabbed my sledgy and started smashing the buggery out of it, and it just kept bouncing off and barely left a mark on it. So incredibly strong stuff. That was, of course, what I do is when I'm tabbing these into the boat as stringers, I'll lay the glass up over the edges of it, come in 100 millimeters top, 100 millimeters, whatever. Actually, what does my design say on this? It actually tells me structural cove 2 by 150 millimeter double by 600 millimeter tape, staggered as shown. So there's a drawing here on my design that shows me exactly how I've got to lay it up. On the hull side laminate, I've got 600 gram double bias, 19 millimeter Thermolite. So that's what this is as well. I should probably point that out, that this is 19 millimeter Thermolite. This is rough textured Thermolite. And the one thing, look, I'll show you in the next video that I do anyway. I'll prep the Thermolite and get it all ready, dust it off, clean it off, hit it with some acetone, get all of the dust off so that I don't have any delamination problems. Then I lay my vinyl ester resin over the top of that and get it all down. I've got a piece here that I have laminated. This is just a cut-off piece, essentially. It's a little bit, I've already sanded that, so it's a bit rough, but you can see how that's, the laminate's over the top of that. Stuck to it very, very well, no problems, and that's never ever going to come off. We might come up with some ideas to try and test that in future and smash it up and see how far that'll go, see how strong it is. The other thing that you can get as well is some of the double bias and biaxials come in strips, in rolls, I should say. So this here is a 200 mil. Remember I was saying before, 200 millimeters. So that's 200 millimeter. What's that? That's 90-90. That way. So you can see the direction again of the cloth. So that's 90 degrees, 90 degrees. So that's our biaxial with the chop strand mat on the back of it. Not forgetting that we always put the chop strand mat down first, then we'll put this down with the biaxial into the chop strand mat, and this chop strand mat is going to be on the top. So the chop strand mat on this particular sheet is always going to be on the top. On this particular cloth is always going to be on the top. Unless you can do it around the other way if you want, but you always finish with a layer of chop strand mat over the top of that. So this is the roll. So roll here. Okay, so that's what I'm using for my tabbing my stringers in, especially. Actually, yeah, that's exactly what I'm going to be doing. So that's it there. All right, and then there's going to be multiple layers again. So I'm going to have my chop strand mat. I'm going to have this down, and then what does it say on my design? 2 by 150 millimeter double bias 600 tapes. There you go. really easy when you get a proper design done, isn't it? There's no guessing, there's no second guessing yourself. It's all there. It's all there in black and white. Easy. So I had Black Pond Marine Consultants do these ones for me. They're on the Gold Coast in Australia. Not sponsored by anybody in any way. Nobody sponsors this channel. So I've paid these guys to do this design for me to make sure that I'm not second guessing myself. I don't have to take any risks. It's been designed properly. Naval architects have been involved in this, and I've got no worries at all. The guys have, when I spoke to the guys about this, sometimes you've got to be careful about telling people, who's done your design, or giving away laminating schedules or things like that. But we talked about this, and they were happy for me to talk about it anyway. And the thing to keep in mind here too is my laminating schedule for my boat may be different to your boat. So this is what I'm using on my boat, but it might not be, what you've got to use. You might have to consider something completely and totally different, something lighter, something heavier, more layers, or whatever the case may be. Now I am going to be adding more layers to this, and the reason for that is the real reason for that is because I'm a paranoid sort of guy. I just want to make this thing as strong as I possibly can. So I'm going to basically do exactly what it says on there. I'm going to use those laminating schedules, and then I'm probably going to add another 1 or 2 layers just to get that thing right and say, yeah, okay. I can't do any more than that. That's pretty much everything. Yeah, it's as good as you can get. Doing it as per the design, and then just taking it that step further. It's not going to make it too heavy. I'm not worried about the weight of this boat because I've got heaps of grunt on the back of it. The one thing that I do not want is a light boat. I don't want to be pounding over the top of those seas because I'm going a long way out in some cases. So I don't want to be going bang, 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 bang. I want it to whoosh, whoosh through those waves and cut through them and sit down in the sea, spray that water off so it dries, keeps the boat nice and dry as well. But that's another topic for another day anyway. Something that I'll just point out here as well is I've got my vinyl ester resin here. I've got some acetone here. But notice I've got these taps on here. So whenever I buy this stuff, and in a couple of my videos I've actually tipped the cans up and weighed I use little scales to weigh my resins, whether it be vinyl ester resin or polyester resin. I always weigh it out. And then measure from there, measure my MEKP to get it right, to make sure that I'm spot on. I have learnt in the past that essentially somewhere between 1.2 kilos and 1.5 kilos of the vinyl ester resin is as far as I want to go. If I want a little bit more working time, then I'll back it off a little bit, and I might even drop that MEKP down a little bit so it's not getting as hot. So what I want to do is give myself enough working time, because don't forget, there's a number of layers that we've got to go through. So we've got to wet out the surface, we've got to wet out that substrate, then we've got to lay our chop strand mat down on top of that, then we've got to roller it all out, make sure that there's no air bubbles in there. Then I normally put another layer of resin over the top of that, and then I'll put my double bias or whatever I'm using on top of that again, and then I'll roller that out. So that all takes a bit of time. And we need to make sure that we give ourselves enough time to do all of that work without that resin starting to gel off. Because once it starts to gel off, that's the end of it, It'll start to gel, it'll get hard to work with, it's just almost impossible to do anything with it. And if you've got any imperfections in there, then you're going to have to come back, sand it back, grind it back, redo it, whatever. So very, very important to try and get that right, that don't put 2-3 kilos in there, because unless unless that's what you do for a living and you're a professional shipwright, then I certainly wouldn't be going down that path. It's just way too much resin to use and a lot of wastage. So yeah. The other thing that's sitting here is the wax in styrene. So this is the very last layer that goes on there. Whenever I'm doing it, so you'll notice here it says unwaxed, vinyl ester resin, unwaxed. So the wax in styrene is the very last layer that goes in. So in my laminating schedule, if it shows multiple layers, so I've got the 600 gram double bias, 600 gram biaxial, 600 gram double bias, there's no way known I'm going to get them all down in the same laminate. So I'll have to do a couple of layers, then I'll have to wait for that to go off, and then I'll have to come back and redo it. So what I'll do there is, look, I know when you're using unwaxed resin, there's no need to sand it back, but I'll typically, because of the weather that we're having and everything, I'll typically sand that back, hit it with some acetone, clean it all up, get all the dust out of it and everything, all the imperfections, make sure everything's out of there, and then lay my next lot. But in that last layer, it may be the second layer there. So the second layer is 600 gram double bias and 600 gram biaxial. I'll add my waxing styrene, and I believe I did write it on there. It's 3%, 3 to 5%. So measure that out. Obviously, add my catalyst in there, or the MEKP, and then add my waxing styrene in over the top of that. So that'll make sure that the finished texture, or the substrate will not be tacky, because the unwaxed resin is always tacky, and then seals it all off with the wax layer coming to the top. Okay. Something that I don't know if I ever sort of mentioned it, but when we're forming molds, we always wax it. So once you've built the mold and everything, what you don't want is to lay your resin in over the top with your fiberglass and everything, and then have it stick to the mold. So the whole idea of this wax is to make sure that it doesn't stick to the mold, and when you go to pull the mold or the project out of the mold, it releases nice and easily. And that's exactly what I did with mine. I used this, what's it called? High temp wax, particle high temp wax. So just rag, dip it in there, rub it around, give it a nice good sort of polish if you like, and then I started glassing in over the top of that. So that's what that's for. There's other compounds that I'm going to be using, and I'll explain them when I go through it. Fumed silica, cabasil, talc is another product, peanut butter, some people like to call it, bog, whatever, different glues, different fillers, ferring, Q-cell, a lot of those things we're going to have a look at, and as I go through and we progress further and further and further into this project, then I'll explain everything that I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and my understanding of it. Just keep in mind, again, I'm not a professional shipwright or a boat builder by any means. You know, in Australia you don't have to be in doing these sorts of projects. You don't have to be. A lot of people have said to me, well, why'd you spend so much money getting a design done up and everything, mate? You don't need to do it, just go and do it. Well, I just didn't want to take any risks. I wanted to make sure that when I put 600 kilos of outboard on the back of that hull extension, it's not going to fall off. 100 nautical mile out at sea, you're in gear, you're heading up to a bombing, and you're into reverse, then those engines are going to be fastened to that hull extension and nothing's going to go wrong. So that's why I've spent the money to do this, and to make sure that everything's 100%. Okay, so that's pretty much it, I think. That'll do it for this video. I'm just looking at the time now, that's 25 minutes. It's about 25 minutes of me waffling on, gabbling on. So that'll do it for this video. Don't forget that the next one is going to be about getting the Thermolite ready, preparing the Thermolite, laying glass on that, 600 gram chop strand mat, and the quadaxial on top of that, and that'll be for some bulkheads and stringers. So I'm preparing all of that so that when the weather does finally come good and I can go to the boat, then I can start putting that stuff in. Alright, so there we go, guys. Hope you enjoyed that. I hope you got something out of that, and if you haven't already, please subscribe and keep following the channel to see how I do this hull extension, how I change this boat. Legends. Good on you, people. Thank you.